Most people try to change their life by changing their goals. Very few change the way they think at 7 a.m. Your morning cognitive patterns determine your emotional range for the rest of the day. Within the first 20 minutes of waking, your brain shifts from theta to alpha wave dominance. This is when belief patterns are most impressionable. If your first thoughts are reactive, distracted, or anxious, you reinforce instability. If they are structured, intentional, and disciplined, you reinforce control. Stoicism was never about suppressing emotion. It was about training perception. Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations as a morning calibration tool. Epictetus trained students to examine impressions before accepting them. Seneca rehearsed adversity in advance to reduce shock. These are not motivational ideas. They are cognitive frameworks. And it took me 10 years to understand that mental rewiring is not about positive thinking. It is about structured interpretation. If you want practical Stoic philosophy applied to modern psychology and cognitive science, subscribe to this channel. You will get frameworks, not fluff. Let's begin. 1. Lesson 1. Most suffering is forecasting error. For years, I believed anxiety came from circumstances. It does not. It comes from inaccurate prediction. Your brain constantly predicts outcomes. Neuroscience shows the brain is a prediction machine. It tries to reduce uncertainty by simulating worst-case scenarios. The problem is that these forecasts are often exaggerated. Stoic framework. Separate probability from imagination. In the morning, ask, what am I assuming will go wrong today? What is the actual probability? Most of your fear collapses under statistical thinking. You rewire your mind by replacing emotional forecasting with rational estimation. This reduces anticipatory stress and increases calm decision making. Epictetus taught that people suffer more from their opinions than from reality. Forecasting error is a modern explanation of the same idea. You are not reacting to events. You are reacting to imagined outcomes that have not happened. Anxiety grows when imagination outruns evidence. You assume rejection before the conversation. You assume failure before the attempt. You assume conflict before the meeting. These assumptions feel real because your body responds to them as threats. Morning calibration interrupts that cycle. Write down one feared scenario. Then assign it a realistic probability, not a feeling, a number. When you force your brain to quantify fear, exaggeration weakens. You can go further. Ask yourself, if this outcome did happen, what would I actually do? Most of the time, you already have a response. The fear shrinks when you see that you are capable of handling the result. This practice builds cognitive discipline. Instead of letting your mind drift toward catastrophic simulation, you direct it toward rational estimation. Over time, your baseline anxiety decreases because your predictions become grounded in evidence. The goal is not blind optimism. It is accuracy. Accurate thinking produces emotional stability. When you reduce forecasting error, you reduce unnecessary suffering. And when your predictions improve, your calm becomes consistent instead of fragile. 2. Lesson 2. Identity is built from repeated interpretation. It took me years to realize that identity is not built from achievements. It is built from how you interpret events. Two people fail. One says, I am not capable. The other says, this is feedback. Same event, different identity outcome. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to interpret insult as ignorance, not attack. That preserved dignity. Morning framework. Ask, what kind of person would interpret this constructively? You are not reacting to life. You are training your identity. Marcus Aurelius wrote reminders to himself about how to view betrayal, criticism, and inconvenience. He understood that interpretation shapes character. Each reaction reinforces a version of you. Over time, those reactions become identity. When you interpret failure as proof of weakness, you strengthen insecurity. When you interpret it as instruction, you strengthen resilience. The brain encodes repeated interpretations as self-concept. What you tell yourself consistently becomes who you believe you are. This process is subtle but powerful. Identity is not formed during major achievements. It forms in small daily moments. A delayed response, a rejected idea, a mistake at work. Each event offers a choice of meaning. Morning reflection prepares you in advance. Visualize a likely challenge. Then decide how your future self will interpret it. Pre-decision reduces emotional drift. You respond according to design instead of impulse. Constructive interpretation does not mean denying difficulty. It means extracting utility. Ask what the event reveals. Ask what skill it demands. Ask what standard it tests. This shifts your role from victim to participant. Over time, this practice builds a stable internal narrative. You begin to see yourself as adaptable, disciplined, and rational. That identity produces behavior aligned with strength. If you want to rewire your mind, start with interpretation. Your future character depends less on what happens to you and more on how you repeatedly choose to explain it. Lesson 3. Emotional amplification comes from narrative, not event. The event is small, the story is large. Cognitive behavioral research confirms that rumination multiplies distress. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. They warned against adding opinion to raw fact. Morning exercise. Describe today's biggest stressor in one neutral sentence. Example: the meeting may include disagreement, not, they are going to undermine me. This shrinks emotional charge. Epictetus taught that impressions arrive first, and judgment follows. Most people collapse the two into one. The moment something happens, they attach a dramatic explanation. That explanation fuels emotion far more than the event itself. When you tell yourself a threatening story, your body reacts as if the threat is real. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, focus narrows. All of this can happen before anything concrete has occurred. The narrative creates a physiological response. Neutral description interrupts exaggeration. It forces you to separate observable fact from assumption. Facts are limited. Stories expand endlessly. When you strip away adjectives and predictions, the situation often appears manageable. Rumination strengthens negative narratives. The more you replay the story, the more convincing it feels. Each repetition adds detail, tone, and imagined outcomes. Over time, the narrative feels like certainty rather than speculation. Morning practice builds narrative discipline before stress escalates. Write the situation in plain language. Remove motives you cannot prove. Remove future outcomes you cannot guarantee. Keep only what is verifiable. This method protects mental energy. Instead of fighting an inflated scenario, you address a contained issue. Calm thinking becomes possible because you are no longer reacting to a fictional expansion. With repetition, you begin catching narrative inflation in real time. You notice when your mind adds intention, hostility, or catastrophe without evidence. You correct it immediately. Emotional stability grows when you manage the story, not just the event. By controlling narrative size, you control emotional intensity. And when intensity drops, rational action becomes easier and more consistent. Lesson 4. Attention is a limited economic resource. Your brain has finite cognitive bandwidth. Research on attention residue shows that task switching reduces performance and increases stress hormones. The Stoics guarded attention aggressively. Epictetus advised students to avoid intellectual and emotional distraction. Morning framework. Choose one cognitive priority. Decide what will not receive attention. Rewiring your mind begins with attention discipline, not motivation. Epictetus warned that whatever captures your attention begins to shape your character. Attention is not neutral. It directs thought, and thought directs behavior. If you allow everything to enter your mind, you weaken control. Modern environments compete for your focus constantly. Notifications, headlines, messages, and endless scrolling fragment your concentration. Each interruption leaves residue. Even after you return to your task, part of your attention remains attached to the previous stimulus. This fragmentation increases stress. Your brain shifts rapidly between contexts, which elevates cognitive load. Over time, this constant switching reduces depth of thought and weakens emotional regulation. You feel scattered because your attention is scattered. Stoic discipline begins with selection. You decide what deserves mental energy. In the morning, identify the single task or principle that will define the day. Make it specific. Clarity reduces drift. Then identify what will not receive attention. This is just as important. Decide which conversations, media, or distractions will not enter your cognitive space. Exclusion protects focus. This practice strengthens internal authority. Instead of reacting to whatever demands attention, you allocate it intentionally. You become the gatekeeper of your mind. Attention discipline also improves emotional stability. When you focus deeply on one meaningful objective, Trivial irritations lose influence. Purpose narrows emotional fluctuation. Over time, sustained focus builds confidence. You see progress. You complete meaningful work. That completion reinforces self-trust and reduces anxiety about unfinished tasks. Rewiring your mind requires controlling where energy flows. Motivation fades. Discipline of attention endures. When you master attention, you master the direction of your thoughts, and your thoughts shape the quality of your life. 5. Lesson 5. Comfort lowers psychological tolerance. Modern environments reduce friction. Temperature control, instant entertainment, algorithmic validation. Over time, your tolerance for discomfort drops. The Stoics practiced voluntary hardship to reset tolerance. Mental framework. Do not ask, how can I feel comfortable today? Ask, what small friction will strengthen me? Psychological resilience increases when you normalize controlled discomfort. Seneca advised practicing periods of simplicity and restraint. He believed that when you rehearse discomfort intentionally, you reduce fear of losing comfort. Fear weakens when exposure becomes familiar. Constant ease lowers your threshold for stress. Minor inconvenience feels extreme because your nervous system lacks contrast. When you rarely experience friction, even small resistance triggers frustration. Controlled discomfort recalibrates that threshold. When you choose effort, restraint, or inconvenience, you expand your tolerance. The same stressor that once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. This is not about punishment. It is about adaptation. The brain adjusts to repeated conditions. If you train it in mild adversity, it strengthens. If you train it only in comfort, it becomes sensitive. Morning application can be simple. Delay gratification. Complete the hardest task first. Avoid immediate stimulation. Sit with minor boredom instead of escaping it. These micro challenges compound. Each voluntary challenge sends a message to your mind. Discomfort is not danger. That message reduces anxiety in unpredictable situations. You respond with steadiness instead of urgency. Controlled friction also strengthens discipline. When you practice choosing effort over ease, you reinforce identity as someone who can endure strain. Identity built on endurance increases confidence. Over time, resilience becomes automatic. You no longer seek constant relief. You accept effort as normal. That normalization reduces emotional spikes when conditions become difficult. When you train tolerance daily, external stress loses leverage. You remain composed because your system has adapted to pressure. Comfort no longer defines your stability. Strength does. 6. Lesson 6. Most anger is ego defense. It took me years to see that anger is often wounded self-image. When criticized, the ego interprets threat. The Stoics reframed criticism as information. Morning calibration. If someone challenges me today, what part of my ego will react? Is that identity fragile? When identity becomes principle-based instead of reputation-based, anger decreases dramatically. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that other people act according to their understanding, not to injure his identity. This shift removes personalization. When you stop seeing criticism as an attack on who you are, emotional intensity drops. Anger often masks insecurity. When someone questions your competence, intelligence, or authority, your reaction reveals attachment to image. The stronger the attachment, the stronger the reaction. Ego seeks protection, not truth. Morning self-examination exposes these attachments before they are triggered. Identify the roles you protect most. Professional status, intelligence, moral superiority, social image. Once you name them, you weaken their control. Principle-based identity operates differently. Instead of asking, how do I appear, you ask, did I act according to my standards? This internal metric stabilizes emotion because it does not depend on public approval. Criticism then becomes data. If it contains truth, you adjust. If it does not, you discard it. You no longer defend reputation at all costs. You defend integrity. This shift reduces escalation. You listen longer. You respond slower. You separate tone from content. Emotional charge fades when you treat feedback analytically instead of personally. Anger also decreases when you accept imperfection. If your identity requires flawless performance, every mistake threatens it. If your identity allows growth, mistakes become part of development rather than threats. Over time, ego loses dominance. You become less reactive because fewer comments pierce your sense of self. Stability increases when self-worth rests on values rather than validation. When you reduce ego defense, you gain clarity. Conversations improve. Decisions sharpen. Emotional control strengthens because your identity no longer depends on constant protection. Calm becomes natural when pride stops demanding defense. 7. Lesson 7. Time perspective determines emotional intensity. Short time horizon equals emotional volatility. Long time horizon equals stability. Studies in temporal psychology show that expanding time perspective reduces impulsivity and stress. The Stoics practiced temporal distancing. They imagined how current problems would appear years later. Morning question: will this matter in 5 years? If not, reduce its emotional allocation now. You rewire your mind by lengthening perspective. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reflected on how quickly events fade. He reminded himself that both praise and conflict disappear with time. This habit created emotional distance from immediate irritation. When your time horizon is short, everything feels urgent. A delayed reply feels like rejection. A minor mistake feels permanent. Your nervous system reacts as if the present moment defines your entire future. Expanding your timeline changes intensity. Ask how today's frustration will look after months of progress. Most problems shrink when placed against years of growth. Perspective reduces exaggeration. Temporal distancing also improves decision making. When you think long term, you prioritize discipline over impulse. You choose actions that support future stability instead of present comfort. Morning visualization strengthens this skill. Imagine yourself 5 years ahead. View today's challenge from that vantage point. This mental shift creates calm because it weakens immediacy. Long-time perspective builds patience. Progress compounds slowly. Relationships evolve gradually. Skill develops through repetition. When you expect long timelines, you reduce disappointment. This mindset also reduces emotional spikes from praise. Approval feels less intoxicating when you know reputation changes over time. Stability grows when you stop measuring life by short-term reactions. Over time, lengthened perspective becomes automatic. You pause before reacting because you instinctively measure impact across years instead of minutes. Emotional steadiness replaces volatility. When you consistently widen your time horizon, fewer events disturb you. You allocate energy according to long-term value. And with that shift, your mind becomes harder to destabilize by temporary conditions. These 7 lessons took me 10 years because I kept trying to fix outcomes instead of cognition. You do not rewire your mind through motivation. You rewire it through structured interpretation. If this framework-based approach helped you, subscribe now. This channel focuses on applied stoicism, cognitive discipline, and mental strength training you can use immediately. Revisit these principles every morning for 30 days. Your emotional stability will increase. Your reactions will slow. Your identity will solidify. And your mind will become harder to disturb. Epictetus taught that you must train your judgments daily, not occasionally. Consistency changes neural patterns. Sporadic inspiration does not. If you practice these frameworks each morning, you condition your default responses. Transformation will feel subtle at first. You will notice shorter emotional spikes. You will recover faster from criticism. You will hesitate before acting impulsively. These small shifts signal cognitive restructuring in progress. Do not expect perfection. Expect reduction. Reduced rumination. Reduced ego defense. Reduced exaggerated forecasting. Progress in mental discipline shows up as fewer unnecessary reactions, not as total emotional absence. Commit to repetition. Write the questions down. Review 1 lesson each morning. Apply it deliberately during the day. Reflection plus action accelerates integration. Without application, insight fades quickly. If you value mental clarity, long-term stability, and disciplined thinking, subscribe to this channel. Each video builds on these principles. Over time, structured interpretation becomes automatic. And when that happens, calm stops being an effort and becomes your default state.